My family surrounded me at dinner, blaming me for everything. But they didn't know the truth was already on the table. Stay with me while I tell you how it all unfolded, and if my story connects with you, please remember to show some love by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with those close to you. Talia Brooks sat at the long wooden table in her mother's house, her fork resting untouched on the edge of her plate. The smell of roasted chicken and collard greens filled the room, but the air was too heavy for anyone to enjoy a bite. She had barely taken a seat when the storm began. Her mother, Rochelle, leaned forward with tight lips, saying, "Talia, you have done nothing but cause problems in this family. You act like you're better than us, but all you do is bring shame." Her father, Eldridge, shook his head and muttered, "She's ungrateful. Look at all we gave her, and what does she give us back? Nothing but disappointment." Talia's older sister, Monet, crossed her arms, her glossy nails tapping against her sleeve. "You're always jealous, Talia. Admit it. You can't stand that I've built a better life than you." Darius, the youngest but loudest, smirked at her from across the table. "You never get anything right. Always the victim, always crying, always blaming everybody else. Maybe you should finally own up to who you are." One by one, their words cut into her like knives. The table that was meant to hold family love and warmth had turned into a battlefield, and she was the target. Talia sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm. She let their accusations wash over her like waves against stone. Inside, her chest ached, but she didn't flinch. Not this time. Not anymore. She glanced around the table, watching the people who were supposed to love her glare with judgment in their eyes. They thought she was cornered, broken, powerless. But what they didn't realize was that she had been preparing for this very moment. Every insult thrown at her was like a match, but instead of burning her down, it fueled the fire she had been carefully building in silence. Rochelle's sharp tone, Eldridge's disappointment, Monet's smugness, Darius's mockery. They didn't know their time was almost up. Talia lowered her gaze to her untouched plate, her lips pressing into the faintest smile. She didn't need to defend herself tonight. She didn't need to argue, shout, or beg to be heard. Because the truth was no longer locked inside her. The truth was already waiting. And once it came out, it would tear apart every false image her family had painted. So she sat there, quiet in the storm, knowing her silence was more powerful than any word she could say. From the very beginning, Talia Brooks understood what it felt like to live in the shadows of her own family. Growing up, her parents only had eyes for two of their children. Monet, her older sister, was the golden daughter. Everything Monet touched was praised as perfect, no matter how small. When she brought home a report card with good grades, Rochelle would beam with pride and Eldridge would brag to everyone at church. "That's my girl, destined for greatness," they would say. Talia sat in the same room with her own report card, just as good, sometimes better, but it was never enough to earn the same applause. Then there was Darius, charming, reckless, and spoiled. Whenever he made a mistake, it was brushed aside with laughter. "He's just a boy, let him be," Rochelle would say, or Eldridge would excuse him with a wave of his hand. If he skipped school, it was called freedom. If he broke something, it was an accident. But when Talia slipped even a little, all eyes turned on her with blame. She was always held to a different standard, one where she could never measure up. She became the invisible child, sitting quietly at the dinner table, blending into the corners of the room during family gatherings. When she spoke, her words were ignored or dismissed as if her voice carried no weight. If she cried, she was called dramatic. If she succeeded, it was treated as ordinary. Talia carried her pain in silence, because experience had taught her that no one in that house would defend her. Monet grew more radiant in her parents' eyes as the years went by. She was praised for her beauty, her smile, her ambition, even when it was built on shaky ground. Darius remained untouchable, shielded by charm and excuses. Talia was left to patch herself together in the dark, unseen and unheard. But even as a child, she learned something valuable. She realized that attention wasn't always a blessing, and silence could be a shield. She watched, studied, and remembered every slight, every moment when her worth was dismissed. She trained herself not to react to their cruelty. Instead, she tucked her pain away and taught her face how to stay calm, no matter what was said. When Rochelle scolded her unfairly, she didn't cry. When Eldridge ignored her achievements, she kept her smile steady. When Monet mocked her and Darius laughed at her expense, she looked at them with steady eyes and said nothing. On the outside, it looked like weakness. But on the inside, it was strength. Because Talia understood something none of them realized. Being invisible had its advantages. It gave her space to think, to plan, to wait. They had pushed her into the background, but from there she could see everything more clearly. And while they celebrated Monet and excused Darius, Talia quietly promised herself that one day, the roles would reverse. To everyone else, Monet Brooks was the shining star of the family. She carried herself with elegance, her clothes always perfectly styled, her smile polished enough to fool anyone watching. Rochelle bragged about her every chance she got, while Eldridge proudly introduced her as the daughter who had everything under control. Neighbors and relatives praised her, comparing her to a diamond that sparkled in every light. But Talia, sitting quietly on the sidelines, knew that behind that shine was a truth far uglier than anyone wanted to admit. Monet wasn't perfect. She was reckless, impulsive, and addicted to keeping up appearances she couldn't afford. When her friends flaunted designer bags and weekend trips, Monet followed blindly, piling her wants onto credit cards that stacked higher in debt than anyone could imagine. She had mastered the art of smiling through her chaos, pretending her life was flawless while sinking deeper into quicksand. One evening, when Talia was barely 20, Monet came to her room in a panic. Her hands trembled as she shoved a stack of bills into Talia's lap. "You have to help me," she whispered urgently. "If Mom and Dad see this, they'll never look at me the same again." Talia stared at the statements, her stomach sinking. Thousands of dollars charged to credit cards Monet had no way of paying back. Designer shoes, spa visits, late fees climbing with every month. It was a mess. Against her better judgment, Talia agreed to help. She dipped into her own small savings, skipped paying her own rent, and even pretended that some of the charges were hers. She thought she was protecting her sister, shielding the family from scandal. But Monet didn't thank her. Instead, she twisted the story. At the next family gathering, Rochelle discovered a late payment notice addressed to Talia's apartment. Before Talia could explain, Monet stepped in with a sigh, shaking her head like a martyr. "I tried to warn her," she said softly, her eyes filled with fake pity. "She's been reckless with money. I've been covering for her because I didn't want to embarrass the family." The room fell silent. Rochelle's eyes turned sharp, Eldridge muttered about disappointment, and Darius smirked. In that moment, Talia felt the ground fall away beneath her feet. She wanted to scream the truth, to reveal the bills, the phone calls, the endless nights she had sacrificed to cover Monet's mistakes. But Monet's mask of perfection held stronger than any defense Talia could muster. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult she had ever endured. It wasn't just about the money. It was the realization that her sister would sacrifice her without hesitation, all to protect an image built on lies. That night, Talia lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. She made herself a promise: she would never forget this. One day, Monet's lies would catch up to her, and when they did, Talia would be ready. This was the seed planted in her heart, and it would grow into the quiet storm of her revenge. Darius Brooks had always been the kind of brother who could smile his way out of anything. He was handsome, smooth-talking, and carried an air of charm that fooled nearly everyone around him. While Monet was lifted up as the golden daughter, Darius was excused as the carefree son, the one who would eventually find his way. Talia, on the other hand, was never given that luxury. She had to be careful, disciplined, and steady, yet even then she was treated like a failure. One summer, Talia had been working 2 part-time jobs, saving every dollar she could. She dreamed of finally moving out of the house and starting fresh in her own space. Every time she tucked a bill into the small box she kept hidden in her drawer, she imagined the freedom it represented. That money was her hope, her escape, her chance to breathe without her family's judgment pressing on her shoulders. But one afternoon, she came home to find the box half empty. Her heart dropped. She counted the bills again and again, her hands trembling, but the truth wouldn't change. Hundreds of dollars were missing. Confused and terrified, she turned to the only other person who had been near her room that week, Darius. When she confronted him quietly, he didn't deny being near her things. Instead, he put on his trademark smirk and said loudly enough for their parents to hear, "Maybe if Talia wasn't so careless, she wouldn't lose track of her own money." Rochelle stepped in before Talia could explain. "What did you do this time, Talia?" she asked, her tone dripping with disappointment. Eldridge shook his head and muttered, "Always blaming someone else. Take responsibility for once." Darius leaned against the wall, arms folded, playing the part of the innocent. "I'm not trying to embarrass her," he said smoothly, "but she really needs to get her act together." Talia felt the sting of betrayal burn in her chest. The money she had worked so hard for was gone, and yet all eyes were on her as though she were the guilty one. They didn't even question his story. They didn't pause to consider her truth. Their trust in Darius was automatic, while her word carried no weight at all. That night, sitting alone in her room, Talia realized something that changed her completely. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the missing money revealed. Her family would always choose anyone else over her. They would never defend her, never listen, never believe. Instead of crying, she began to think differently. If they saw her as weak, invisible, and guilty by default, she would use that against them. From that moment on, Talia started paying closer attention. She watched, listened, and kept quiet. Whenever Monet lied, she wrote it down. Whenever Darius schemed, she found ways to trace it. Whenever her parents hid their own mistakes, she took note. She stopped expecting their protection and started building her own power. They thought they had silenced her, but really, they had awakened her. And quietly, in the shadows they had pushed her into, Talia began collecting the truth, piece by piece, lie by lie. For the first time in her life, Talia Brooks thought she had found a safe place. Jamari Vaughn was the kind of man who made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. He listened when she spoke, asked about her day, and treated her with a tenderness she had long craved. With him, she believed she had finally stepped outside the shadow of her family's rejection. When he held her hand, she felt steady. When he whispered promises of a future together, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be loved without conditions. But what Talia didn't see was the way Monet's eyes followed Jamari at family gatherings, the way her sister lingered in conversations with him, laughing too long at his jokes, brushing his arm when no one was looking. Monet had always taken whatever she wanted, whether it belonged to her or not. And this time she wanted Jamari. It started with secret messages, calls when Talia was busy at work, and lies spun so effortlessly that Jamari slipped into Monet's world without hesitation. Talia had no idea what was happening until one evening, when a sinking feeling drove her to follow the whispers of her intuition. She drove across town, her heart pounding as she pulled into the parking lot of a small motel. She didn't know why she was there, but when she saw Jamari's car parked out front, her worst fears tightened around her chest like a vice. She forced herself to walk to the door of one of the rooms, her hands trembling. And there they were, Monet and Jamari together, laughter spilling out before their faces fell when they saw her standing in the doorway. For a moment, silence. Then Monet smirked, unbothered. "Well, now you know," she said coldly. "You should have seen this coming, Talia. He was never really yours." Jamari didn't reach for her, didn't beg for forgiveness. He just looked away, shame written across his face, but not enough to stop him. The betrayal struck deeper than anything she had ever felt. The man she thought was her safe place had chosen her sister. When Talia went home and told her parents, hoping for some kind of support, their reaction shattered her even more. Rochelle waved her hand as though it were nothing. "Men make mistakes. Learn to move on." Eldridge didn't even look at her. "Don't make drama where it's not needed," he muttered. Monet, bold as ever, leaned back in her chair and laughed. Maybe he just wanted someone better. The humiliation cut into Talia like glass. Her heart, once soft and trusting, hardened that night. She realized that love in her world was not safe, that family would never protect her, and that betrayal was the only language they understood. And so she stopped hoping for their love. Instead, she began shaping her heartbreak into something stronger. The cold fire of revenge that would one day consume them all. After the sting of betrayal from every corner of her life, Talia Brooks made a decision that would change everything. She realized that her pain had been wasted when it was spent on tears, but it could become powerful if she used it as fuel. So, she stopped reacting and started planning. Quietly, carefully, she began documenting everything her family thought was hidden. Monet, the golden daughter, was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid, and late notices piling up under her mattress. Talia knew where to look. She had once covered for her sister and still remembered the signs. With patience, she collected receipts, copied emails, and stored screenshots that painted the picture of a perfect life built on lies. Darius, the charming brother everyone excused, wasn't just lazy, he was reckless. He ran small scams, borrowing money he never paid back, even pawning items that didn't belong to him. He once bragged to a friend about getting away with stealing from a coworker, not knowing Talia had recorded the entire conversation from the hallway. Every scheme he thought was clever became another piece of evidence tucked into her growing collection. Then there was Jamari, the man she once loved. His affair with Monet wasn't just betrayal. It was proof of how little respect her family had for her. Talia didn't confront him again. Instead, she kept quiet, saving the motel receipts she had pulled from his car and the string of late-night texts she forwarded to her own email. His disloyalty, once a knife in her chest, became another weapon she planned to use. Even her father, Eldridge, wasn't safe. Everyone believed he was the pillar of the family, but Talia discovered the truth late one night when she overheard a hushed phone call. He wasn't just a man who liked to play cards with friends. He was buried in gambling debts. She followed the trail, pulling bank statements and photographing IOUs tucked into his desk. The image of the strong father collapsed under the weight of his addiction, and she held proof of it all. While her family carried on, blind in their arrogance, Talia worked in silence. She picked up 2 jobs, waitressing at a small cafe during the day and working late shifts at a bookstore. Her body ached from exhaustion, but she refused to complain. To her family, it looked like she was barely surviving, struggling in the world without their support. Rochelle would shake her head and mutter, "Poor Talia, she'll never make it." Monet and Darius mocked her, convinced she was failing. But behind the mask of struggle, Talia was building her life piece by piece. She saved money quietly, rented a modest apartment, and built a world far away from their control. And with every dollar saved, with every piece of evidence collected, she was constructing the foundation for something far greater. Her family thought she was broken, powerless, forgotten. But in truth, Talia was playing the long game, and the perfect strike was already in motion. When the phone rang late one afternoon, Talia already knew who it was before she answered. Rochelle's voice carried that sharp sweetness she used whenever she wanted to disguise control as concern. "Talia," her mother said, "we're having a family dinner this weekend. Everyone will be there. It's time we sat down and talked as a family." The words might have sounded warm to an outsider, but Talia knew better. There was no kindness in that invitation, only calculation. It wasn't hard to guess who was behind it. Monet and Darius had likely spun another story, painting her as the villain once again. Maybe they said she was jealous, maybe they blamed her for some problem in the family, or maybe they simply wanted a stage to humiliate her. Rochelle, as always, had chosen their side. For a moment, Talia let the silence hang. She could almost picture her mother waiting on the other end of the line, impatient for her agreement. Finally, Talia said, "I'll be there," her voice steady, almost pleasant. She even forced a smile as she spoke, though her mother couldn't see it. Because this time, she wasn't walking in blind. When the call ended, Talia sat quietly in her small apartment. Her heart wasn't racing like it once would have. There was no fear in her chest, no desperation to prove herself. Instead, she felt calm, a kind of calm that came only from knowing she was prepared. For months she had been collecting evidence: Monet's debts, Darius's theft, Jamari's betrayal, Eldridge's gambling. Every secret they thought was hidden now lived in neatly organized folders, ready to be revealed. They believed she was weak. They believed she would come to that dinner, shrink under their words, and leave in shame. But this time, the script had already changed. Over the next few days, Talia planned every detail. She printed out bank statements, emails, and photographs. She made copies, placing them in a thick folder that would be impossible to ignore. She imagined the moment she would lay it on the table, watching their faces shift from smugness to shock. For the first time in her life, she would not be the quiet, invisible one. When the night of the dinner arrived, she dressed simply but with purpose. A calm expression rested on her face as she walked toward the house she once called home. The glow of the porch light spilled onto the front steps, and the familiar sound of voices floated through the door. As she stepped inside, Monet smirked at her from across the room, and Darius gave a mocking laugh. Rochelle greeted her with a tone too sweet to be real, while Eldridge barely looked up. They thought they had set a trap, one more attempt to crush her spirit. But Talia sat at the table with a calm smile, her folder resting quietly in her bag. They didn't know it yet, but this dinner would not end the way they planned. It would end on her terms. The restaurant was dimly lit, the kind of place Rochelle loved to choose for family dinners. Expensive enough to impress, but cozy enough to control the atmosphere. Talia sat at the end of the long table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. She knew this wasn't about reconciliation. It was a staged ambush, the kind her family was infamous for. She had walked into the trap willingly, but only because she had come armed. Rochelle leaned forward first, her voice cutting through the soft clinking of glasses. Talia, I raised you better than this. You've turned your back on your family, and for what? You don't even call, you don't visit, and when you do, it's always attitude. You're ungrateful. Her eyes narrowed, daring Talia to disagree. Before Talia could even shift in her chair, Eldridge slammed his hand on the table. His words came sharp and heavy, like the clatter of silverware. Your mother is right. Look at you. What do you even have to show for yourself? No husband. No house. Nothing. You act like you're better than us, but you're nothing. Across from her, Monet gave a slow, poisonous smile. She swirled her wine glass like she was starring in a show only she could see. You know what this really is? Jealousy. She tilted her head, letting her diamond earrings catch the light. You've always wanted what I have. My career, my relationship, my life. Maybe if you stopped obsessing over me, you'd actually get your own. The words hit like knives, but Monet wasn't finished. Oh, and Jamari? He's with me because I'm what he wanted. Maybe you should stop embarrassing yourself. Darius leaned back in his chair, laughing low. Classic Talia. Always crying victim, always failing. You've never gotten anything right. I don't even know why you bother showing up. You're just the family disappointment. The voices rose around her, sharp and cruel, each one trying to outdo the other. Talia let them circle like vultures, let the accusations sink into the air until the table was thick with venom. Her heartbeat was steady, her hands calm. When the storm of words reached its peak, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself. She simply reached into her bag and placed a sleek black folder on the table. The chatter stilled. Her fingers lingered on the cover as she looked at each of them. Her mother's cold eyes, her father's bitter glare, Monet's smug smirk, Darius's mocking grin. Then she gave a small, calm smile. You've all had your turn to talk, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. Now it's mine. She slid the folder to the center of the table. The sound of its weight against the wood cutting sharper than any insult. Everything you think you know, she whispered, leaning back in her chair, is about to change. The folder landed with a thud, and for a moment no one moved. Rochelle's perfectly manicured fingers twitched, her eyes darting to Eldridge as if asking him to take control. He reached across, snapped it open, and the first sheet slid into view. Silence cracked. Bank statements. Eldridge muttered, his face paling as his own name appeared next to casino withdrawals and IOUs. The numbers bled across the page. Tens of thousands gone, gambled away in secret. Rochelle's breath hitched. Talia said nothing. Monet leaned in, smirking until her eyes snagged on the next set of documents. Credit card bills in her name, past due notices, loan sharks warnings. Alongside them, screenshots of her fraudulent transactions. Money funneled through accounts she swore didn't exist. Her smirk evaporated. This isn't real, she hissed, her voice cracking. Oh, it's real, Talia murmured, her tone razor-sharp. Then came the photographs. Grainy but undeniable, Monet slipping into motel rooms, Jamari's arms around her. Receipts stamped with dates and times. Eldridge flipped the page, his mouth tightening. Rochelle gasped, clutching at her pearls like a caricature of herself. Monet pushed the folder back like it was poison, her face blotched red. This is a setup, Monet screeched, standing so quickly her chair screeched across the floor. But her protest was drowned by Darius's laugh, sharp and cruel. Look who's talking about setups, Talia said softly, sliding out the next packet, emails and bank transfers linking Darius to stolen funds and scams. Victims' names lined the evidence, police inquiries highlighted. Darius's grin faltered. You, he started, but Rochelle cut him off with a shriek. Darius, do you know what this means? Do you know what you've done to us? The table erupted. Everyone spoke at once, shouting, cursing, accusing. Eldridge slammed the folder shut, but it was too late. The truth had spilled, and it couldn't be contained. Monet turned on Darius, spitting venom, calling him a thief. Darius fired back, reminding her she wasn't so perfect with her unpaid debts. Rochelle screamed at Eldridge about the gambling. Eldridge shouted back about her willful blindness. Jamari sat frozen, pale as the walls, while Monet's fury turned to him. You were supposed to keep this quiet. You said she'd never know. She set me up. Jamari stammered, sweat dripping down his temples. This isn't my fault. Not your fault. Monet's voice cracked like a whip. You begged me. Enough. Eldridge roared, but the chaos only grew louder. The once perfectly staged dinner had dissolved into a battlefield, every alliance shattered, every secret exposed. And through it all, Talia sat still, her wine glass in hand. She didn't shout. She didn't defend. She simply leaned back in her chair, a quiet smile playing at her lips as her family tore each other apart. For the first time in her life, the fire wasn't directed at her. They were finally turning on each other. And she had only just begun. The shouting behind her was so loud it rattled the dishes. But Talia rose from her chair with the kind of calm that silenced her own heart. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The folder sat abandoned in the middle of the table like a grenade that had already gone off, and her family was too busy clawing at each other to notice her stand. Rochelle's voice shrieked about betrayal. Eldridge barked about ruined reputations. Monet hurled accusations at Darius, and Darius snapped back, his face twisted with rage. Jamari's name was tossed around like a curse, Monet's voice breaking every time she spit it out. It was a circus, a mess of voices all blending into chaos. And Talia, the girl who once sat invisible in the corner of her own home, pushed her chair back with grace and walked away. Her heels clicked softly on the floor, each step steady, deliberate. No one looked up. No one tried to stop her. Not even Rochelle, who once clung to her as the scapegoat for everything wrong in the family. They were too wrapped in their own unraveling lies to notice that the one they blamed for years was slipping out free. She reached the doorway, paused just once, and let her eyes sweep over the scene. The Brooks family, polished and pristine on the outside, now crumbling like a house of cards in the place they thought was safest, their dinner table. They had set the stage to humiliate her, but all that remained were their secrets spilling like wine across the linen. Talia didn't feel pity. Not anymore. She felt the kind of release that comes when chains finally snap. The night air greeted her as she stepped outside, cool and sharp against her skin. She closed her eyes and inhaled, the noise of the argument muffled now by walls and distance. For the first time in her life, she wasn't carrying their weight. She wasn't trying to fix what they broke, or begging them to see her worth. She was simply free. A smile curved across her lips, small at first, then brighter, stronger, until it reached her eyes. She had planned this moment for years, patiently collecting, waiting, watching. And now it was here. The silence of the night felt like applause just for her. Behind her, the shouting grew louder, chairs scraping, accusations flying. But that wasn't her world anymore. She had walked through fire, and instead of burning, she had forged herself into steel. She took one last look at the house, its warm lights glowing against the dark sky, then turned her back to it. Her steps down the walkway were unhurried, confident. With each one, she felt lighter. Her revenge was complete, and she knew with absolute certainty she would never go back. Do you believe Talia was right to leave her family behind after exposing all their secrets? Or should she have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if stories like this keep you hooked, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what comes next.